Grandpa has a variety of abilities to offer to the family, and today we're going to be ranking and explaining every single one of them. Some of these abilities can be confusing if you're not familiar with the game terminology, and some of the abilities even have other mechanics that aren't mentioned in their descriptions. Also, the ranking of these perks for today is just my personal opinion, and I would love to hear your thoughts on everything down in the comments. Today's video has also been time-stamped so that you can jump to any of the abilities you may be looking for, and the abilities will also be in alphabetical order. Additionally, if you enjoy what you see today, consider dropping a like or subscribing, as it helps me to continue making content here on YouTube. We've also made videos in the past breaking down all of the family and victim perks, and I'll leave a card on screen and links in the description for those. Lastly, a live stream over on Twitch, so come jump into the action, link in the description. But let's dive right in. So before we get into each of the abilities Grandpa has to offer, I'd like to briefly cover how these abilities function in a match. In the designated loadout of any family member, you'll find a section that is dedicated to Grandpa abilities, and you'll have certain abilities offered depending on how you filled out your family member's skill tree. All family members have access to all Grandpa abilities, with the exception of Leatherface, who does not have access to Suffocating Grip, and Nancy, who doesn't have access to Brute Strength, Exterior Alarms, Suffocating Grip, Swinging for the Fences, Well-Fed Youngins, and Windoom. During a match in TCM, you can see what Grandpa abilities your team has on the right side of your screen, and they'll become activated when Grandpa is fed and reaches level 1, 2, and 3. The perks are always in random order regardless of the type of ability and regardless of what family member brought it. The perks will become active from right to left, and they'll be highlighted in yellow once they become active. But with that out of the way, let's jump into each ability. The first ability we have on the list for today is Always in Sync. When active, the family focus ability duration is increased and the cooldown is reduced. For those of you who don't know, the family focus ability is something that is available to all family members, and it allows the family to see important objects such as blood buckets, key items or locations, basement doors, and more. By bringing this Grandpa ability, you'll gain extended uses of the ability with a shorter cooldown between ability uses. I'll be placing this perk in the B tier due to the fact that the family focus ability can be critical in helping family members check on key items and locations, which can help them figure out what type of an escape a victim may be attempting. This ability isn't incredibly powerful, but it can bring utility to everyone, and it can help improve the family's overall success in a match. Next up, we've got the Grandpa ability Animal Farm. This perk is a pretty simple one, and it just increases the chicken detection radius. Chickens, which are also referred to as nuggets, will create loud noises alongside noise notifications if a victim gets within close proximity of them. This ability will simply increase the range at which chickens will detect victims. We'll be placing this ability in the D tier. While this ability can be useful for tracking down victims, there are often lots of noise notifications happening throughout the duration of a match between both the victims and family. In order to get value from this perk, you'll need to have extremely good communication with the rest of the family alongside top tier map knowledge. Even with those skills in place, I believe there are stronger abilities that can help prevent escapes rather than information that can be picked up in other ways. After that, we've got the ability Barge To The Point. Barging doors always opens them on the first try. Barging doors is a way to break open doors that players have latched shut. Both victims and family members can do this, but it will typically be victims latching doors to escape the family, unless the family has a complex defense strategy planned. The perk simply allows family members to break through a latched door on their first attempt, rather than having to slam into the door multiple times. I'll be putting this one in the D tier. This ability is actually insanely useful when it works, but the problem is that it relies on victims latching doors. Most matches, you won't see this happen unless you're chasing in specific areas of the basement, and on top of that, there's no guarantee that the perk will even be active. Next up on our list is Brute Strength. This slightly increases melee damage for all family members. There isn't too much to say about this one other than it's just marginally increasing the damage for the entire family once activated. This can be a bit more useful if you have a low savagery composition across your team. We'll be placing this one in the B tier. Overall, it's just a nice passive buff that's easy for the whole family to use, and it can help put more pressure on victims in terms of needing to heal more frequently. This can even help to secure the occasional kill, and it's a pretty good middle-of-the-road ability. After that, we've got Don't Have All Day. Stamina drain while sprinting is decreased by 20%. There also isn't a lot of depth to this one, but you're going to be moderately decreasing the amount of stamina that you're using while this ability is online. This one can prove to be a bit more useful with low endurance family compositions. I believe that this ability sits well in the B tier. It can be better or worse depending on your family member composition, but overall, it's another perk that can bring a nice passive buff and even stack well with perks such as Scout. On the whole, I think it's a decently good choice. Next up, we've got Excited Grandpa. Delay between Grandpa's sonar ability is reduced by 20% at each level. This one is just another percentage increase, so there isn't a lot to say, but essentially this ability reduces the amount of time that there is between Grandpa's howl at each level. And this ability can become pretty powerful, especially at higher levels, putting tons of pressure onto victims. This is honestly one of the best abilities Grandpa has to offer, and we'll be placing it in the A tier. This perk causes victims to stop more frequently in order to avoid sonar, and it makes Grandpa an even stronger tool for the family. It places so much pressure onto victims, and it can help to slow down any hasty players. This perk does require the family to work together to feed Grandpa, and it isn't quite as useful if you randomly get this at level 3 within a given match. After that, we've got Experienced Stalkers. This reduces the family proximity warning range for victims. This one can be a bit more confusing if you aren't familiar with the terminology. Family proximity warning is essentially a quote terror radius for victims, letting them know when family members are close or closing in. This warning is indicated by a yellow border that surrounds a victim's screen, and it becomes slightly more intense as the family becomes closer in proximity. This ability reduces the range for victims, meaning that the family members can get closer to a victim before the proximity warning becomes active on the victim's HUD. This ability honestly isn't very good, but it can have its moments every once in a while, which is why we're going to be placing it in the C tier. It isn't difficult for victims to be observant of where family members are due to the third-person camera and chatter. I think this perk becomes more valuable in the basement when victims may not be suspecting a family member, but on the whole, this ability isn't quite as useful as the others. Up next, we've got Exterior Alarms. When active, all critical doors and gates are highlighted for 5 seconds if opened. This perk highlights any critical exits when they're opened, essentially meaning any doors or gates that lead to escapes. This applies to doors that are locked by default, so this has another really interesting use because of that. Exterior alarms will actually highlight basement exits when they are opened by survivors, as they fall under the category of a critical door, meaning you can get some great usage from this perk for any victims who are escaping the basement or who have decided to return to the basement. This is hands down one of the best Grandpa abilities in TCM, and we'll be placing it in the S tier. This ability can help family members to quickly react to dire situations and save themselves from a victim who is on the verge of escaping. It can give the family instant knowledge on victims' whereabouts and help them to quickly regain the upper hand in a match. After that, we've got Nobody Escapes Hell. The minigame for locked doors is 40% more difficult for all victims. This ability refers to the lock minigame, which is just the process of unlocking a door when using an unlock tool. When this ability is active, it will make the minigame more difficult, or in other words, it will take victims much longer to complete the minigame, as they will have to complete more taps in order to unlock a door or gate. Interestingly enough, this ability stacks with the perk security pins available on the cook, which makes added locks 50% harder to unlock for victims. So this ability can be pretty brutal when used correctly. This is another incredible ability that has earned its spot in the S tier. By bringing this ability, you'll make it extremely difficult for victims to unlock doors and gates without being caught, and the ability only gets more valuable with a cook on your team. It buys a family more time in any given match, which is one of the most important factors within a game. You'll be hard-pressed to find many Grandpa abilities that compare to this one. Up next, we've got Suffocating Grip. The close encounter minigame is easier by 20% for the perk holder. The close encounter minigame refers to when a victim begins a struggle with a family member while having a bone scrap in their inventory, and it should be noted that family members cannot begin close encounters. This ability just increases your odds of winning the button tap minigame by making it easier for the family, but it's also important to remember that close encounters are influenced by a victim's attributes and stats. Though this ability can be absolutely amazing if it works, there's no guarantee that you'll even get to use this in a match, which is why I'll be placing it in the D tier. This ability is entirely dependent on if a victim starts a close encounter, so you have no control over the use of the ability. Alongside all this, it only applies to the perk holder and not the entire family. I don't think this ability is useless, as it can help to secure a kill in the event of a close encounter, but it's just a little too situational for my liking. Up next, we've got Swinging for the Fences. This reduces stamina consumption on melee attacks by 20%. This ability really isn't too complicated, and you'll basically just be using a smaller amount of your stamina bar every time you use a melee attack. Again, this could prove to be more useful on any low endurance family compositions. I find this to be a very middle of the road family ability, so we'll be placing it in the B tier. I honestly think it's a good passive ability that can help out the family here and there, but it most likely won't have the largest impact within a match. And I don't think there's much more to say about it, rather than it's an average perk that can be mildly helpful in some situations. After that, we've got the perk Well-Fed Youngins. Whenever Grandpa's sonar is activated, all family members instantly regain 50 stamina. Basically, every time Grandpa howls, this ability will become active and cause family members to regain a good chunk of their stamina. It is a bit situational, but it can become slightly more useful by pairing it with other abilities, such as Excited Grandpa. Though this perk has an awesome buff to offer, it's just a little too situational to bring utility in your matches, and I'll be placing this in the top of the D tier. Most of the time, victims will be hidden during Grandpa's sonar, and this is really when the ability would be most useful. I've gotten some great use out of this ability during the late game when the pressure is on and victims are forced to be moving more, but overall I think that escape prevention abilities tend to be more useful. Additionally, this ability really isn't as useful unless Grandpa has achieved a higher level. Up next, we've got Well. Victims that jump down wells take 50% more damage. Every time a victim returns to the basement by using a well, they'll be receiving more damage upon their landing. This can be a very punishing ability in many situations and pairs well with Leatherface. This ability can also have some great synergies with perks such as Down the Rabbit Hole. Due to the fact that victims are constantly using wells throughout the match, this perk absolutely earns its spot in the S tier. It not only makes health management more difficult for victims, but it can make them more vulnerable in the basement where they are typically safest. It really helps to keep victims hurting when they use a well to get out of a chase, and this is absolutely one of the best Grandpa abilities you can bring. Last on our list for today, we've got Windoom. Victims take 50% more damage when jumping out of windows. Whenever a victim jumps out of a window, they'll be receiving more damage upon landing. This perk is very situational and map dependent, but it's a good option for some very specific defense strategies. Though this ability is great when you get value out of it, most matches won't include victims jumping out of windows due to the risk of that action, which is why we'll be placing this in the D tier. I think that this ability can be great with certain maps and defense strategies, but there's never a guarantee that you'll get use out of this ability because it relies on a victim using a window. This perk is also completely useless on maps such as Slaughterhouse or Gas Station, which is another reason we placed it so low. Those are all of the Grandpa abilities we have for today, but I truly hope you all found this guide to be helpful. Leave a comment down below on what you think the strongest Grandpa ability is, and if you did enjoy the video today, be sure to drop a like and subscribe. Thank you all so much. We'll see you in the next one.